The hospital room was quiet except for the steady hum of the machines and the faint ticking of the wall clock. Outside, the city of Seattle was alive with lights and laughter, but inside that room, the air felt heavy, as if time itself was holding its breath. Emily lay there, pale and fragile, her once bright blue eyes dimmed by months of battling an illness that seemed determined to steal her away. That evening, as the shadows lengthened and the world outside prepared for another night, she whispered words that broke Michael's heart into pieces. "It's my last night." Her voice trembled, but it was steady enough to pierce him. For a moment, the world collapsed around Michael. His chest tightened, his vision blurred, and he felt the ground slipping beneath his feet. But instead of letting despair swallow him whole, he bent close, clutching her hand as though he could tether her to life itself, and whispered back with fierce determination, "No, Emily, I promise you, it's not your last night. I'll give you 1,000 more." Before we dive deeper into this story of love, resilience, and the power of hope, I want to ask you something. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in the strength of human love that refuses to give up even in the darkest moments, please take a second to like this video, subscribe to our channel Hopeful Stories, and share it with someone who might need a reminder that miracles can happen even when everything feels lost. Michael and Emily's story had begun in a far less dramatic way, years earlier. They met in a bookstore on a rainy afternoon. Michael, a graduate student in engineering, was buried in technical manuals, while Emily, a passionate literature student, was reaching for a worn copy of Wuthering Heights. When their hands touched on the same book, they exchanged a smile that lit up both of their worlds. From that moment, their lives intertwined with laughter, arguments about books versus science, coffee dates that stretched into sunsets, and a love that felt as natural as breathing. But life has a cruel way of testing even the strongest bonds. Just 2 years into their marriage, Emily began to feel exhausted all the time. At first, they dismissed it as stress or poor sleep. But soon, fainting spells, chest pains, and endless fatigue pushed her into hospitals. The diagnosis was devastating, a rare form of heart failure. The doctors were cautious with their words, never promising too much, only explaining treatments and limitations. For Emily, every day became uncertain. Michael transformed overnight from husband to caregiver. He memorized every medication schedule, every dietary restriction, every emergency signal. He spent sleepless nights sitting by her bed, watching her breathe, as though his gaze alone could keep her alive. But behind the mask of strength, he carried a storm of fear. He didn't let her see the tears he shed in the shower or the way his hands shook when the doctor spoke in quiet, serious tones. That night, when Emily whispered that it was her last, he refused to let fate have the final say. Michael remembered every promise they had made, the vacations they planned but never took, the house with a white porch they dreamed of, the children they wished to raise. 1,000 more nights, he told her, not just as comfort, but as a vow he was willing to fight for with every ounce of his being. The next morning, instead of crumbling, Michael acted. He researched tirelessly, calling hospitals across the United States, looking for specialists, experimental treatments, anything that could buy them more time. He worked double shifts to pay for medical bills, sold his car, even borrowed money from friends, because love gave him the kind of courage that defied logic. Seattle's rain-soaked streets became familiar to him as he rushed from work to the hospital, holding on to hope like a lifeline. Emily, too, was torn between despair and gratitude. There were days she wanted to give up, exhausted from the endless prodding of needles and the dull ache in her chest. But then Michael would arrive with fresh flowers, her favorite peppermint tea, or a story to make her laugh until tears rolled down her face. On those nights, she remembered the girl in the bookstore and the boy who smiled at her as if she was the only person in the universe. That memory and Michael's unwavering love anchored her. The months that followed were not easy. Emily endured painful treatments, setbacks, and days when she could barely open her eyes. Michael faced financial struggles, loneliness, and moments when his own strength nearly cracked. But through it all, He never let go of her hand, never let her believe for a second that she was alone. Slowly, their story began to shift. A breakthrough came when a specialist in California agreed to try an experimental procedure. It was risky, uncertain, and costly, but it carried the spark of possibility. The night before the surgery, Emily once again looked at him with tired eyes and whispered, "I'm scared, Michael. What if this is really my last night?" He cupped her face gently, his eyes filled with tears he could no longer hide, and said, "Then let it be the night before the rest of our lives. Because I promise you 1,000 more, and I intend to keep it." The surgery was long, tense, and filled with waiting that felt like centuries. Michael sat in the sterile waiting room, clutching Emily's scarf to his chest, whispering prayers he wasn't even sure how to form. When the doctor finally emerged with a tired smile and the words, "She made it," Michael collapsed into a chair, sobbing with relief. Recovery was slow, but it was real. For the first time in years, Emily's cheeks gained color, her laughter returned, and she could walk without struggling for breath. Michael took her outside into the Seattle rain, letting the droplets kiss their skin as they laughed like children. Every sunrise became a miracle, every shared meal a celebration, every quiet night together a treasure. But what made their story extraordinary was not just the medical victory. It was the love that carried them through the storm. Michael's promise wasn't about counting days. It was about filling whatever time they had with joy, kindness, and memories worth keeping. And Emily, who once believed she had only one night left, found herself living not just for herself, but for the love that refused to give up on her. Years passed, and their bond only deepened. They never did count the nights, because in truth, they had been given more than numbers. They had been given moments. 1,000 sunsets, 1,000 whispered, "I love yous," 1,000 chances to prove that hope can outlast despair. And even on difficult days when fear crept back in, Emily remembered that night in the hospital when Michael held her hand and promised her the impossible. Against all odds, he had made it real. As you listen to this story, I want to pause here and ask you something from the heart. If Emily and Michael's journey touched you, if it reminded you of the power of love, sacrifice, and hope in the face of darkness, please give this video a like, share it with others, and subscribe to Hopeful Stories. Your support helps us continue bringing you true stories that remind us all that miracles can still happen. And now, before we end, I have a special request. Please drop a comment below with the words "Hope Lives On" if this story moved you. Because sometimes, the smallest words of hope can light up someone else's darkest night. Emily and Michael's story is not about perfection. It's about persistence. It's about a woman who thought her journey was ending and a man who loved her enough to believe in more. It's about the nights they almost lost and the countless mornings they gained. And it's a reminder for all of us that sometimes the greatest miracles are born not from medicine alone, but from the unshakable promise of love.